Howdy folks, welcome to the third show of the Scannell Agenda. Today's date is September 6th, 2013. Beautiful day down here on the Cape. This is the best weather on Cape Cod that you could ever hope to get. So welcome to the Scannell Agenda. As usual, we're at the Cape Cod Community Media Center down here on 17 Shadhole Road in Dennisport, so thanks very much. Beautiful facility here. Really appreciate it. We're going to start the show talking about the Presidential Scallop Hotel. And I think I named it that because when I was working at the Marine Laboratory on Nantucket, we were working on different applications for the grow out of bay scallops. But my system, which I call the Aqua Hotel or the Presidential Scallop Hotel, is, I think, a pretty good system, but it's different in that it's highly mechanized. It's the American way, a lot of steel, a lot of hydraulics, bing, bang, boom, just, you know, you'll see. It's really an American system as opposed to the old Chinese systems that we've been using for decades around here, which is this hand gear and these little lantern nets and pearl nets that we used on Nantucket, which we improved on and we made them work. But the problem there is, you know, what will work in China for aquaculture and the people making 50 cents an hour won't work here if the people here are making $14 an hour. You know, you really need to think about the labor. And scalability, too, is another thing. I mean, these systems here, the Presidential Scallop Hotel with the factory ship and all the gear, that's very scalable. We could produce a lot of shellfish and fish with this gear. So once we learn how to do this and model this up and get the bugs out and pilot the project and, you know, see if it'll work, then you go into production and then it's scalable, I think, if this works out. I mean, it could be that some other system is more efficient, and that's good. So when I was working at the Nantucket Marine Laboratory, which was, at first it was NREF, we called it, Nantucket Research and Education Foundation. And I was on the staff there, and we had a big crew of regular folks and disabled folks that we would teach aquaculture and how to, you know, how to work with all the aquaculture gear. Because there's basically three components that we used. We used the hatchery component, and then the nursery component, and then the field component of aquaculture. My specialty is public aquaculture as opposed to private aquaculture. I'll get into that, but mainly in private aquaculture, what you're trying to do is raise the animal to marketable size and then sell it. But with public aquaculture, what you're doing is actually a lot more efficient in that you're raising the animal at the, let's say, at the maternity ward, which is your hatchery. And I'll get into the floating marine laboratories, which we're going to need to go with this system here. But in public aquaculture, you're raising up scallops, lobster, codfish, kelp, eelgrass, what have you, anything. Could be anything. You're raising that up until it can survive in Mother Nature, and then you're letting it go. And with public aquaculture, what we do is we use the Market Quota System, which I explained to you, which is pay to play. Then you tax the seafood as it comes in. Say it could be a bushel of quahogs, or it could be a bushel of scallops, or it could be a box of lobster, or, you know, codfish, various things of what have you in the ocean. Then that money is part of a financial cycle, and that goes back into the public aquaculture systems. So we go from and transcend this business of foraging. We go from foraging, which is bad. What we're doing now is bad. It's bad, bad, bad management for fisheries. and we go to this great system of, you know, well-rounded system of public aquaculture and really great fisheries management, because in my view, fishermen shouldn't be doing the fisheries management for the most part. It's the guys that really, and the gals, whatever, that really know the animals, that are really in tune with all these aquaculture systems, and they're familiar with the habitat, familiar with the animals from cradle to grave, and familiar with fisheries, just more well-rounded. So I think I was pretty well-rounded since I had some couple of years of work at the Nantucket Marine Laboratory, and a couple of years on the board there, a few years on the board, and then did some aquaculture work, you know, a lot of fishing, a lot of fisheries work. So I think that helped me to design a rather well-rounded system where all the parts work together organically, so to speak, for the whole purpose. Okay, this is the aquaculture factory ship. I'm using a 1/16 inch to 1 foot scale. So this is a big boat. It's an ugly boat, which I apologize for. I was just trying to come up with some kind of barge or something. I mean, we can do better than this. It's an ugly damn thing that I came up with and just, you know, got it out of some 2-inch styrofoam. So 1/16 equals 1 foot, and this is 448 foot by, it's rather wide, 192 feet. So this is a big bucket of rust here, you know. Okay, and this would be a pilot house up on top. So the real bones of this system is a line operation whereby the cages go in a line, and they get handled, and there's Velcro and zippers and what have you. It's a fast system. It's designed to be very speedy, unlike the old Chinese gear that we use. So this here is what I call, you can call it the Aqua Hotel. I call it the Presidential Scallop Hotel. And it gets lifted out of the water, and it goes onto a catamaran. The catamaran picks these things up. So this is a representation. These little things here are representations of this Presidential Scallop Hotel. Now, this is about a 140-foot catamaran. It's got to be big, but it's lightweight catamaran. And it's got a cover for a reason. You can't let these animals be drying out and getting blown by the wind and such. So this here represents a steel cage about 20 feet wide by 4 feet. And the cages all come off inside the factory ship. And the cages might look like this, but this was an early attempt. And here are some scallops in here. But it could be anything. It could be scallops. It could be quahogs, oysters, sea clams, lobsters, polyculture. It could be a few different things growing together so that you don't have to tend it. In other words, it could be like some snails mixed with a few baby flounder, mixed with a couple lobster, mixed with some of this and that, scallops or what have you. I like the polyculture ideas. So the basic components come apart, and since these are big, well, what you can't see, maybe you can see it, but if you look dead on, you can see my face probably through. Now, if you can see my face through there, you can imagine that this is a system, unlike other aquaculture systems that I've used, whereby the water flows through, or the air breezes through, you might say. Or the water, it's got good water flow, and that can be measured using test tanks and whatnot. But that's so important to design a system. I know it may look funny because it's round and it's got all this empty space in here. And then these here are spacers, which are so important. These are spacers which space everything all apart, and this is all variable. Of course, this is a representation of what could be, steel bars. What you want is a system where the air breezes through, if you know what I mean, or the water, the flow, the tide flow isn't encumbered, because what you don't want is a pressurized area here where the water goes up and around. And we had some gear on Nantucket that we tried that presented too much of a wall for the water or the current or the tides, however you want to put it, that are trying to breeze through, because you've got to take away the feces from the shellfish. There'd be a lot of that, and it's got to be able to get blown through with the tide. And you got to bring, with the tide, you've got all the food in the water, and so that's critical that it naturally be there for the shellfish. And the more flow you've got, the denser you can pack your animals and the more profitable you can be, so-called profitability with dense packing the shellfish, which is kind of a beef I have with the systems we have now, is that we use aquaculture systems now that the private aquaculture systems tend to be too dense with animals, and so what happens is it just invites disease to come along, like the QPX disease. Many years ago, we had discussions about that at the Milford Laboratory, annual meetings that we'd have down there in Milford, Connecticut, National Marine Fisheries Service. But to me, private aquaculture has a few problems, and one of the problems with private aquaculture is the invitation of diseases into the natural habitats, by virtue of the fact that you've got the profitability of your aquaculture grant or your farm depends on how dense you can pack your animals. And so you're trying to get as much as you can out of the limited acreage that you have. So you're packing the animals in, densely packed, dense pack, and and they might get stressed out, like quahogs or oysters or scallops or what have you. They can get stressed out, salmon, and then they get diseased, and then the disease can spread. And another factor with your private aquaculture that you won't find at all, hopefully, you won't find it at all with public aquaculture, is you won't get people with public aquaculture, trying to beat Mother Nature's own system with genetically superior grades of quahog, let's say the Notada brand. I know it's a very popular thing to fool around with Mother Nature and to go with a faster growing quahog or what have you, or scallops. We tried that on Nantucket with some narrowing of the genetic base, which I kind of disagreed. I strongly disagreed with it. So I believe in Mother Nature's own stock being used with public aquaculture systems. That's a pretty firm foundation with me. And I do not believe in trying to re-engineer genetically, especially Mother Nature. So Mother Nature needs what it's always gotten, basically. And that's what we got to answer to. And we can't reinvent the wheel. Mother Nature has it figured out. So that's what these systems are all about. These are public aquaculture systems. And there are distinct advantages with public aquaculture over private aquaculture. Another advantage is your harvests from the wild are will be much greater with public aquaculture. You'll be taking part of the proceeds from, let's just say, a bay scallop fishery Maybe you'll take 20% of the value of a bushel of scallops, or in this case, if you get a 5-bushel limit, your value for the fishing rights would be a 20% of the fishing rights value. You could just, with that particular fishery, you could just lay that down on the table. You know, you're going to pay 20%. You know, some parts of the market quota system, you can bid for percentages of the value of the catch to go towards public aquaculture, to be used as a tax. But you can also, using the market quota system, just lay down the law and say, okay, 20% goes back as a reinvestment into public aquaculture, into the infrastructure, the habitat, et cetera, et cetera. So now I never would have invented this presidential scallop hotel if I didn't have the market quota system as a basic foundation in my philosophy. My philosophy is public aquaculture and very much production-minded fishery management, as opposed to, ooh, what do the fishermen want to do? You know, what do the fishermen want to do? I'm not with that at all. I'm not down with that, as they say. You know, what the fishermen want to do is what the kids want to do when they get into a candy store. That's about it. So the presidential scallop hotel, I think, is a real good system, but it's nothing like what you're used to having on your table, because it's a system that's big. It's big in cost, but as far as scalability, it's more efficient than trying to pay somebody to use the Chinese gear. So on a very, very small scale, maybe we can make the Chinese gear work, but it's been decades, and we really haven't made this stuff work. Now, in China, they use our particular scallop, bay scallop that they got right here. Now, what the Latin name is, irradians. Darn it, I can't remember it. Anyway, Argopecten irradians, maybe. Anyway, these bay scallops here were gotten as seed and then taken to China. So when you see those little, some people refer to them as erasers, those bay scallops are seed bay scallops of our own variety. Those are Cape scallops or Nantucket bay scallops. And that's what you're buying, because they took them. I know the guy that got them over in the vineyard. He's a fisherman named Mike. I hope he doesn't mind this, Mike Pacandra. And he got them as seed. It was through a treaty. Anyone, you know, China had a vast stock of seed available by treaty for aquaculture purposes. So that's what they use over there in China. That's what you're buying when you buy these bay scallops, these little tiny frozen bay scallops. So I've always said too, hey, we ought to be over there hiring some of these Chinese people who have been, you know, raising our scallops for many years. You know, get a few of these guys over here and hire them and see what they have to say about, you know, systems like this. But I have to reiterate, the most efficient aquaculture is the public aquaculture if it's done well. And you really have to tend to your beds. You have to tend to getting proper stock that you're raising at your hatchery. It's not going to take overnight. You know, we're not going to do this overnight, but there have been a lot of good recipes that have been done at the Milford Labs, and we do have a lot of knowledge, but we haven't scaled up. And the reason we haven't scaled up is because we don't have a production fishery management system. We don't use the market quota system. We use the patronage limited entry systems of fishery management, which don't work, as I've explained to you. These patronage systems don't work. So back to the line. These cages go through a line, and here I have drawn up what would be a working line operation it's kind of complex because these cages want to be in the water as much as possible. You don't want to dry these out. You don't want temperature changes. You don't want any shocks to these animals. When I say animals, I mean shellfish or finfish. And so there's a lot of conveyor belts here. There's a lot of tables. There's 96 tables on the line here. And this would be the meat portion of this whole operation, this crew on the line. And they would probably work a six on, 6 off shift, as we would in commercial fishing. And there's different areas here. This is cage assembly and repair. Here's a galley and a lounge, another lounge, and there's a lot of little staterooms, little tiny staterooms for the all your factory workers, your aquaculture factory ship workers, or your fisheries workers, I don't know, aquaculture workers. So this is a 448-foot barge, basically. It doesn't have its own power. And then you've got the next level would be work areas, and you'd need a pretty big area for the assembly and disassembly of all the cages and racks. And so you'd have frame assembly and repair, you'd have rack repair, miscellaneous shop area, and then you'd have conveyor belts going up and down. So it'd be quite a busy operation. On your bottom level, I have designed here, and of course, you know, it'd be fun to have this take off as a project with other people other than just me, you know, because I'm not an industrial designer. I don't design ships for a living, of course, you know. No one would have this even in their bathtub, this thing here. It's not even good enough. But it's just a starting point. So you've got here wet storage for the assembled racks so that you could be, you know, putting the presidential Scallop hotels, pulling them out, disassembling them, or assembling them. It's a holding area. And while you've got your presidential Scallop hotels loaded and holding, you would have these you'd have these catamarans that would pull up here, and then they would be loading and unloading and going to and from the grounds. And this is a very shallow water barge, light duty, but it's big. It wouldn't be a North Sea type construction. It'd be very light. It would have some spuds to stabilize it. These would be nice little boats to run, I would think. That'd be kind of a fun job, picking up and dropping off these aqua hotels, or whatever you want to call them. I call them presidential Scallop hotels. So you'd have refrigeration gear, pump gear, generators. These catamarans could push the vessel along in between as we go from the coast, from, let's say, Bridgeport, Connecticut to Chatham, Massachusetts, all up and down the coast. And then all up and down the coast would be your Marine Laboratories. So if we scaled this up, we'd probably have, you know, 5 or 6 of these factory ships running at full scale down the road once we figured out, well, we think this works, you know, if and when that happens. So I wouldn't have come up with that if I didn't believe in agricultural principles applied to fisheries management. And basically, the market quota system is agriculture, agricultural economics, because it's simple. You're just using part of your landings, part of your fisheries landings to put back into the ocean. And for the life of me, I don't know what's so difficult about this concept. You know, I don't know why people like say, oh, I don't want to pay. I don't want to pay. You know, it's like, it's ridiculous. Because there's fisheries management and production, and then, okay, there's your balance sheet with your boat and your problems, and that's you, and that's me, and, you know, fisheries management is different if it's done well. It's different than an amalgamation of a fisherman's problems. It's inclusive of that if it's done right, but it's not centered on that. Right now, our fisheries management is centered on the problems that fishermen have. So, this is a huge jobs program. The Presidential Scallop Hotel is a massive public works, aquaculture, fisheries project. It's public aquaculture, and it definitely has to tie to the market quota system. You don't want to be doing this kind of thing unless and until you have a fishery management system that makes sense from a production standpoint. Now, should we subsidize fisheries if we don't have an economic system whereby fishermen, whether recreational or commercial, pay in? I don't think so. I think we're stuck with a pig in a poke with our system of patronage that we have now. It's just no damn good. And a lot of fishermen were saying that, and I was saying that many years ago. I was saying, this is not good, it's not right. You can't just ostracize fishermen. You know, if the government wants to do conservation, there's nothing stopping the government from doing conservation. We never had to give away the public treasury to do conservation. We never had to do that. That was very, very bad thing to do. That was a bad idea. All right, that's the show for today. That's the Scannell agenda. I design comprehensive, complex systems for the public trust, and this is one of the best ones I've got. And I can guarantee you that this is worthy of modeling up. I guarantee you that much. Okay, thanks very much, Cape Codders.